Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ask Dr. Pat Davidson show. We're coming to you live from somewhere, and by somewhere, I mean beautiful San Marcos, Texas. We have on the line the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Pat Davidson himself, teacher, professor, speaker, athlete, coach, husband, and overall certified nice person. Pat, welcome to your show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Dave, and I just want to start off by saying that the blue team is in fact going down, and you can say all the nice things in the world about me, which are 50% truish, but I want to come out strong and just say hashtag red team, uh, better red than dead, big red machine going to just stomp its way through Blue City.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
Wow. Yeah, it's
yeah,
weird. I don't know. It's weird being on the best looking and on the team that's ever been. But yeah, best performing. I think we've got a shot at dodgeball and basketball. Major hoopers going down. So I don't know. We're
when
just
did
looking at it
basketball
we're looking at it
when
from a
did
pure
basketball get
points
added to this?
perspective. But that's neither here nor there. Rumble in the Jungle going down. Very excited for that. The
Yeah,
format
people
for
that
this.
don't know.
Yeah, it's literally taking over my life. It's such a we were talking about this earlier. It's like Pat's training methods of just like forcing people to change because of this massive threat has literally got me doing aerobic work nonstop, sleep, nutrition, just dialed in more than ever, just so Blue Team has a shot. So the format for this show is we are going to post a Facebook status. It's like, hey, give us questions. We have a lot of good ones today from all the peeps out in Facebook land. I'll ask them, Pat will answer them, rinse, repeat. Super simple, nice and easy. So
Yeah, we
we'll
got some
get,
good ones here too.
oh man, I'm especially excited about this first one. It comes from my boy, Stephen McGuire asks, I'd sincerely love to hear your pros and cons on bench press position, arch versus no arch, and how the shoulder is impacted.
Yeah, great question. Super timely. I feel like, worlds are colliding here. We have like old school powerlifting dogma up against in the red corner, coming in at a fighting weight of 275 pounds. You know, record of 50-0 with all wins coming by way of the KO up against like new school like thoracic diaphragm aligned with pelvic diaphragm fighting out of the blue corner with like it's kind of like, hey, why would I arch like crazy and like squeeze my shoulder blades together and do all this kind of stuff versus why would I bench with a flattened back and maybe protracted scapula. And I think that it really just comes down to strategy and or like what is the major outcome you're looking for? It's one of these like Dan John statement of the goal should stay the goal. And what's your goal? Like, is your goal to be the greatest power lifter of all time? And if it is, go ahead and use this like bony impingement strategy of just like, impinge the hell out of everything on the posterior side of your body. Bring the shoulder blades together, bring the posterior vertebrae together, and shorten the distance that the bar needs to travel through so that you can potentially move more weight. You will be incredibly stable with a impingement strategy of bone on bone. It's just that you'll also probably not be able to do anything else in life. Like it's kind of the Mike Cantrell wrestling an alligator concept of
Mm.
like, how do I reduce the ability of an alligator to move? Like, well, I'd hop on its back, I'd grab its snout, and I'd pull it into extension. And the last time I heard Mike Cantrell say that, he said, probably the only thing that a gator can do in that position is bench press. And it's like, you're right on
Yeah.
the money. Like that's it. Like you're like if you're concerned about things like degrees of freedom, skeleton, you probably want to try to train in a way that utilizes an anterior impingement strategy. Bringing the anterior rib cage closer to the anterior side of the ilium. That way you're going to be able to optimize the position of the thoracic diaphragm, You'll gain stability in the thorax via really getting air on an inhale to move into the posterior compartments of the lung, which should cause the expansion of the rib cage on the posterior side, pushing the posterior rib cage into the concave abutment with the scapula. And that's like reactive neuromuscular training, RNT, the Gray Cook concept, putting a band around the knee. If I put a band around your knee and it collapses your knees in, you'll reflexively uh, push your knees out. So if I'm pushing air into the posterior compartments of your lung and pushing your ribs into your scapula will reflexively push back on the ribs, and you'll use muscles like serratus anterior to cause that to happen. So it's like we're going to seek stability in some way, shape, or form. It's just an
Yeah.
impingement strategy of stability, or more of like in this particular case, like utilizing muscles to strategically allow you to bias air into compartments of the lung that would then cause this RNT response of scapula muscles that would ultimately give you a muscular stabilization strategy of the scapula and the humerus inside the glenoid fossa.
Right.
So it's sort of like I actually I have these hype education sessions every Wednesday for an hour, and it's a similar format to what we're doing here. It's like I want it to be question and answer because it leads into these super interesting places from a discussion standpoint. And it's funny, like you get a bunch of people in a room together and everybody's afraid to ask the first question, and I get real antsy when that happens. So I start firing questions back at people, and like I can get really combative with the way that I ask questions. But it's sort of like I really started 2 weeks ago with a similar sort of thing where it was like, are we at the point where we can say that it is death to chest up, butt back, shoulders back and down in terms of cueing exercise for anyone other than a power lifter? And like I would say like I'm okay with saying like I probably am there, like in the way that I coach. Um, there is like it's sort of it's tricky because it's kind of like I would say that if you can go chest up, butt back, shoulders back and down, and perform your exercises, you lift weights, it looks okay, and then after the fact, you're able to demonstrate movement variability. You're still able to breathe. You're still able to have IR and all that kind of stuff. Like you can probably get away with it, but you're probably like the genetically lucky. You're just someone that like, you just got it. Like you can do whatever you want, and you can eat the worst diet in the world, and you still have a six pack. You can lift however you want, and your joints are still beautifully stacked and move really nice together. But you're probably going to lose that as you age, number one, and if you've got that, like good for you, but the rest of us probably don't.
No.
So, I'm gonna generally try to do everything I possibly can to allow you to have the same ultimate like uh, total work capacity. I want you to have the same absolute level of force production, repeatability, all that kind of stuff. I just think that if I can do it in a way where I don't compromise your ability to breathe with an inhale coming from a diaphragm, then why wouldn't I do that? Like if you're not in a position where your diaphragm can drive your inhale, you're still going to inhale air. It's just that you're going to kind of like downshift and resort to these other approaches like pulling air in with your neck or your back or your calves or whatever. You'll just resort to these kind of like survival based needs that you have left. So it's just I think it's a trickier question ultimately that doesn't have exactly one answer as the correct answer. But overall, I would say you're probably you can get a similar outcome. Like I can bench press more weight with anterior impingement as opposed to posterior impingement.
Hmm.
Uh, and I have way less negative neck and shoulder problems doing a lot of bench press volume with the anterior impingement strategy. Um,
Right.
so and again, like I keep getting older. It's not like I'm not moving closer to 20. Um, so it's like things
Yeah.
shouldn't be getting better for me,
Right.
but they are numbers wise. So I
Yeah.
like what I'm doing.
As far as the so like we've seen your videos of the way you bench, and you've got your feet elevated a little bit. What are some of the other, say, like from a just practical application? Say I'm a guy, I've always done super arch powerlifting back bench. What are some kind of cues, modifications, major points of performance from the anterior impingement strategy that you've seen so much success with?
Yeah, and, I think that where I usually have a decent ability to connect with people from different realms, and in particular like powerlifters, because I always say to powerlifters like, "Hey, do you like to floor press?" And they always say, "Oh yeah, I love it. It feels so good on my shoulders." And I say, "Well, do you think that it feels good on your shoulders because you're reducing the range of motion?" And they're like, yeah, it's probably what it is. Like, I'm not going all the way down and touching the bar to my chest. Like, when my elbows hit the ground is where I stop. And I say, well, is that the only difference between floor pressing and regular bench pressing? And they have to pause and think. And I go, well, let me lead this horse to water. What are you doing with your feet when you're on a floor press? And they, well, my feet are flat on the floor. Like my knees they're essentially in a hook lying position. And I always say, well, do me a favor. Next time you go and bench press, just on a light set. Like, because it's always guys that have shoulder problems that contact me by like Facebook Messenger. And they're like, listen, I can't press anymore. My shoulders are bothering me. And I go with this same line of discussion. Like, I'm very repetitive. It's like playing chess with people in some ways. I've got my opening move, and I always go with the same opening move. It like works every time. I go with this floor press rationale with powerlifters, and I say, hey, next time you go and bench press, start with having your feet on the bench in the same way you'd have it for floor press. Tell me how it feels on your shoulder, and they go, oh man, it felt so much better. So I go, do you think that it's the range of motion that you're displaying with your arms, or do you think it's the position you're putting your feet in? And now they're left in this existential crisis, and that's where I try to get people. But
Yeah.
it's kind of like, and then it's like, well, what do you think is happening to your body when you put your feet in that position? And they nobody ever gets it, but it's like they're literally just repositioning their pelvis. It's like
Right.
they're just pulling their pelvis under them to a greater degree, and they're creating more of this like I like the term anterior impingement, because impingement is just very self-explanatory. Two bones coming towards each other. And if I've got the anterior part of the pelvis and the anterior part of the ribs moving towards each other, well, there's anterior impingement and ultimately posterior instability. And that's what I'm trying to create. Whenever there's instability, there's a chance for movement to take place. And I'm looking for movement of air to go posterior in the posterior compartments of the lungs. And again, it's just this RNT concept on the
Mm.
shoulder that's driven by air in the lungs. Um, but it's I think that sort of gets at the
Yeah. Are you
at
ever
the
are you ever getting, so I'm completely selfishly asking all these questions, but are you ever getting a little bit of a reach at the top?
Oh, absolutely. I'll do that for myself, and I'll allow that reach to ultimately tip my head back and give me a little bit more cervical lordosis. Like for me, it's my shoulder. Like I'll get some like shoulder stuff every now and then, and I think that it's totally neck driven for me.
Hmm.
I mean I'm like a neck patient anyways. So if I can give myself a little bit of cervical lordosis on a bench press, it's like it goes from like, oh, my shoulder's hurting to I don't feel my shoulder at all.
Right.
And a lot of other people, like if I can give them bench press, they thing like my shoulder just doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
And the simplest cue for me is like, yeah, reach at the top and feel that reach tilt your head back. And then do not look at the bar while you're bench pressing. Just
Mm.
like whatever part of the ceiling that reach caused you to have to look at, just keep looking there. Like you don't need to see the bar to know that you bench pressed it.
Right.
But it's amazing. Even when I get heavy, I start really trying to look at the bar. It's like I'm using my visual system to try to bench press with at that point.
I got you. Cool. Okay. Hammered that one. Solid. Next question we've got from Jared Wolf. What are your recommendations for best bang for your buck aerobic / cardiovascular exercises and progression when the goal is general health and longevity? Jared's trying to make some
So
money.
I gotta tell you what here. Like this question, and I think that we have the like Dan Trink's question coming up next, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's like these ones just are like I like it. It's almost like a baseball lineup that I saw in front of me when you sent me over the email of the questions. I was like, that's a good leadoff question right there. You know, nice and easy, like get a man on base, you know, just get the momentum going. And then I got this guy in the two hole coming up that's just gonna like do some damage. And my three hitter is like my absolute moneymaker, and they're gonna follow on each other so well. So to me, it's kind of like I'm looking forward to putting together what will ultimately be the rethinking the big patterns too, because I really think that like having given that presentation three times now, and it's like the ideas just become more concrete in my head of like where this is ultimately going, and to me like rethinking the big patterns is a biomechanics based seminar. And when I had to give like a shortened version on a Sunday afternoon 4 hour seminar that I taught in the city like maybe 6 weeks ago or something like that. And it was like, how do I condense a lot of this into like 4 hours to try to give people like a pretty decent experience? And I was just thinking like, well, if it's biomechanics is kinematics and kinetics. And if I'm talking about kinematics, like usually it's like I give this quick answer of like kinematics describes the quality of the movement, or it describes what the movement looks like. And kinetics describes the outputs, like the actual measurable quantities associated with the movement that you're doing. So like the force, the velocity, are typical kinetics measurements. So I started to think, well, like, all right, if I'm talking about what movement looks like as kinematics, how do I actually begin to like categorize that and classify that into like separate buckets? So that's kind of like you're familiar with RTBP and the fact that it's based on movement patterns, stances, and planes. I think are the three big kinematics components, and it's sort of like with this title of the course, Rethinking the Big Patterns, I started this off with like saying, well, most coaches that are coaching people are using things like, their big patterns are hip dominant, knee dominant, horizontal push, pull, vertical push, pull. So I've got like my list of patterns that I use with people, and like my list of patterns are locomotion, change of direction, triple extension, hip dominant, knee dominant, um, horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical push, vertical pull, and then it would also be core exercises, like core for pelvic focused and core for rib focused. So I think it's like 10 or 12. I don't know exactly what it is. But ultimately, like I would choose one of those movement patterns, and then I would put the pattern into a stance. So if I've got hip dominant pattern, I would then put that pattern into a stance, and let's say it's in of the stances are bilateral symmetrical, asymmetrical front back, asymmetrical lateral. Let's just say I go with asymmetrical front back, and then I would take that stance and I would put it into a plane, and the planes are sagittal, frontal, and transverse. So I would have a hip dominant movement pattern done from an asymmetrical forward backward stance focused on the frontal plane in this particular case. And if you understand the sensorimotor competency checklist, you automatically know how to coach that. Okay, like I'm going to put one foot in front of the other. It's a single leg deadlift, but I need to center the person over that leg that they're going to be deadlifting off of, and they should be feeling, adductor, ipsilateral abs, and potentially, probably not in this case, but contralateral posterior glute med. I'm going to probably put the load in the contralateral hand to facilitate some serratus on that side as well. So it's kind of like I'm looking at this stuff, and then it's like, okay, that's cool. That's sort of that really satisfies the kinematics side of the equation. And then I need to take this next step and go over to the kinetics side. And I would say, well, what level of, there's three variables I put in the kinetic side of load, velocity, and duration. And to make it simple, I just made three subcategories of those things: high load, moderate load, low load, velocity, high velocity, moderate velocity, low velocity, and duration, long, moderate, and short. So it's kind of like I have my pattern in my stance, in my plane, and now I decide, is this a movement that I want to do with what kind of loading, what kind of velocity, what kind of duration? If I'm doing a single leg deadlift, I'm probably thinking along the lines of moderate load, moderate velocity for probably a short to moderate duration. And, it's almost like you kind of begin to understand what that is on some level. So when it comes to aerobics, it's sort of this idea of, look, any movement can ultimately be an aerobic based activity. It sort of depends on the kinetics side of that spectrum. If you've got high load, high velocity, like, it literally cannot be aerobic. Like, there's just no way. It's not possible. So I would have to manipulate the kinetic side. I'd probably have to go with low load, low velocity, but then that duration bucket would go into long duration. And I just think to myself, like, well, in terms of overall health, like, I think that overall health is this product of a combination of a VO2 max score plus a joint movement variability level. And if you have a very high VO2 max and a tremendous amount of joint movement variability, I would say you're very healthy, like mechanically and physiologically. Um, and the key would then be, like, you know, how many different patterns, stances, and planes can I get you to do competently in an aerobic manner? And the more of those that you can do, the greater the overall level of movement variability and probably tissue development from a variability standpoint that you would possess. So it's kind of like I would think to myself, like, because quite honestly, like, this question's super interesting, because it really is like, you know, what's the best way to do aerobics for people that aren't trying to specialize in an endurance activity that they would compete in? And it's literally like, the more different modalities that you could create for someone to experience an aerobic response in, the better. It's just that, like, I think that it goes a little bit more than just surface level. Like, because I think if you, it's like, well, we'll bike, we'll do the Jacob's ladder, we'll run or something like that. And it's like, well, you probably have all sagittal based activities. It's kind of like, can you think of an activity that's sort of like, see, the problem with this ultimately is, when we did this seminar in Texas, it was kind of like, it was a little bit more simplified in some ways. It was like, hey, let's just think of a stance, a plane, and kind of like, is this a warm up? Is this like a speed agility? Is this like a heavy ballistic? Is this a compound strength movement? It's like, now this thing actually has expanded quite a bit, because it's become much more systematic and category driven. And ultimately, the problem is that I think I have 12 patterns, and with those different, it of almost 3,000 different activities that you can end up with if you follow this algorithm or matrix out to its end. So it's a little bit tricky, but like to try to simplify this, and because I really think that ultimately, and it's like I'm gonna skip ahead into the next question a little bit, which the audience doesn't know yet, but whatever. Like they'll hear the question eventually, and I'll be redundant because people need repetition to really get these things. There's always going to be a rate limiting factor that's going to prevent you from either making more progress or as a reason to why you're getting injured. And I think that ultimately these things probably go beyond the ability of a human mind to intuit, and that we probably need some level of technology and a computer driven algorithm to be able to ultimately come as close to modeling out the correct answer as possible. And my guess is that uh, there probably needs to be like a like you probably need to accumulate a certain amount of volume in a particular pattern, stance, and plane at a particular load, velocity, and duration. And if you look at someone's overall exercise life, there's probably these huge chunks that they're not accumulating volume in.
Mm.
And as a result of that, their overall portfolio of movement is biased in one direction or another excessively. And I think that like to give an easy example for people to follow along with, well, let's just go and pick on CrossFit for a second. Easy target, all right? Because almost everything that CrossFit does is going to be in the same stance and plane. So almost every activity in CrossFit is a bilateral symmetrical stance done in the sagittal plane. They're when they do fitness, it's most of the strength things, Olympic lifts are bilateral symmetrical stance, sagittal plane. When you squat or you deadlift, it's bilateral symmetrical stance and it's sagittal plane. When they do their conditioning, still usually bilateral symmetrical stance, sagittal plane, because they're going to be doing things like wall balls, burpees, rowers, double unders. They very rarely go into the asymmetrical forward backward stance. The one time I can think of them doing that would be kind of like on a bike, like the assault bike, for instance. But oftentimes you'll see CrossFit athletes get injured or completely bomb on events that get introduced in the CrossFit games. Like the pegboard gets introduced. And it's sort of like, well, it's probably this this different stance plane, or something is different about this that has gone untrained by these individuals. Or they introduce swimming, and it's kind of like swimming, when you really get down to it, is a transverse plane activity in the rib cage. And it's like, when's the last time that any of these people did anything that's transverse in the rib cage? Like basically never. So you're going to see a lot of injuries when you introduce at a very high level of either like competitive adrenaline or force or velocity a new stance, plane, and pattern, um, and vice like so. I think you're kind of seeing where I'm going with this. Like, you, there's a good chance that you're not going to get better at ultimately the goal that you've got if you've got a rate limiting factor from a biomechanics standpoint that's gone untrained because you haven't recognized what it is. And there's probably a higher percent chance that you're going to be injured at some point if you've got these glaring biomechanics holes that are completely undeveloped. And as a result of that, like, you've got to be clever in thinking about things like aerobic activity, because most of these things are cyclical. And so I would say, like, let's just think of an activity that would be like a bilateral symmetrical stance aerobic activity. And I would say easiest one to think of is probably the rower, okay? But that's purely sagittal plane. And so is there like a bilateral symmetrical stance activity that is in another plane? And I say, well, yeah, like something that pops into my mind is like a sledgehammer. Like you can hit a tire with a sledgehammer for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. And that's going to be much more transverse plane with the thorax rotating.
Mm.
And then it's sort of like, well, can you think of an activity that is, because I'm going to skip over it because I can't think of a bilateral symmetrical stance activity that's frontal plane. Maybe hula hooping, quite honestly.
Mm.
Like if I could get, that's probably actually a good example. Like 5 minutes of hula hoop would probably satisfy bilateral symmetrical frontal plane aerobic development. And it'll probably smoke you if you haven't done something like that.
Yeah. When Rogue makes a
Um,
hula hoop, I'm in line.
yeah,
It'll
right.
happen.
It's probably going to be
We should just
black
do that.
metal and it'll be super badass.
Yeah.
Um, Asymmetrical front back staggered stance sagittal plane. To me, like the money maker of all money makers is the Jacob's ladder.
Mm.
Asymmetrical front back staggered stance transverse plane. I don't even know. Like, you know what I mean? It's like you
Yeah.
have to get really creative with some of these thought processes. Asymmetrical front back frontal plane. Now I'm in the land of the versiclimber. Like I look at that thing as like such a beautiful, like a salamander moving frontal plane with an asymmetrical front back staggered stance. The transverse one, I'm a little bit stuck trying to think of that. Give me 15 minutes, I might be able to think of something. You
Yeah.
know, Asymmetrical lateral staggered stance. The easiest one to think of is a frontal plane one, which would be a slide board. But like you've got to be able to think categorically and
Yeah.
plug something into these categories that would probably be like rhythmic and cyclical, that would be ultimately like low force, relatively low velocity, long duration activities. Um, and if you're missing one, you're probably limiting yourself from a health perspective
Yeah.
in terms of reducing your resiliency or robustness as an organism, and from a performance standpoint, you may be missing a rate limiting factor.
And I think
So
for just
hopefully, go
for
ahead.
big picture, it's like I think most people when they're saying aerobic exercise for general health and longevity only have the VO2 max piece. They're like, all right, let me do cardiac output development for this person. Let me get their resting heart rate down. But adding variability, movement variability into that equation and saying, okay, maybe just rower, 2 days a week or assault bike 2 days a week isn't enough for this person. Adding in some of these other things, or even doing general exercises, respecting stance and plane, but lowering the load, lowering the velocity, extending the duration. Kind of just a general circuit, right? Wearing a heart rate monitor. Aside from adding in, if you have access to some of those other stance and plane cyclical machines, Verse Climber, Jacob's Ladder, Mark Trainer, etc., then you can sort of
Hmm.
cover the gamut. But even just the idea of like thinking about movement variability instead of just VO2 max is very helpful for sure.
I think it is, and now that it's funny you're able to sit and like let your brain relax for a second. I can think of some of these other examples like asymmetrical front back staggered stance, transverse plane activity. It's called hiking. If you
Mm,
have to go up a hill, your thorax is going to rotate like crazy. Um, and so yeah, I just think like, hey, aerobics is easy. Okay, aerobics equals VO2. VO2 is defined by the Fick equation, and the Fick equation says that cardiac output times the AVO2 difference equals VO2. And then it's sort of like, well, what factors influence cardiac output? Cardiac output is the product of stroke volume and heart rate. Heart rate is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Stroke volume is ultimately largely controlled by the autonomic nervous system as well. But the other factors that influence stroke volume are it's the main driver of stroke volume increases is total blood volume that you've got in your body. And it's like, well, people that are more aerobically fit have more blood, and in particular the part of the blood that increases more than any other is the plasma volume. And it's like, well, what causes plasma volume to increase? And the answer to that is that you will increase plasma proteins inside the blood vessel that will act as like osmotic targets or magnets to pull out to inside the blood vessel. It's ultimately like what makes you thirsty after exercise. But it's kind of like, is there something like, what plasma protein is the primary driver of all of this? And the answer to that is albumin. So to me, it's kind of like, when I'm thinking about changing the central factors that affect VO2, and the central factors are cardiac output, I can't increase someone's maximum heart rate. That's genetically determined. The only thing I can change is stroke volume. The thing that increases stroke volume is an increase in plasma proteins. The primary plasma protein of interest is albumin. Whatever increases albumin concentrations inside the blood vessel is that which increases cardiac output. And so I don't know the exact, like, I'm not an aerobics guy. You know what I mean? Like, I do enough aerobics so that I can lift more heavy weight. So it's not like I dive into those mechanisms on a routine basis. But the basic science is pretty conclusive that blood volume is the primary thing that changes your aerobic fitness, and albumin is the main thing that does that. So whatever increases albumin, and I do know that testosterone increases albumin,
Mm.
but that will ultimately make you more aerobically fit. So it's like central factors are super simple. Then peripheral factors, which is really the AVO2 difference, is and the AVO2 difference, just to define it for people so they don't think I'm just talking about some random collection of letters. The A is for artery, and the V is for veins. The O2 is for oxygen. So I have oxygen in my blood, and my arteries are the vessels that move away from my heart, and my veins are the vessels that move back to my heart. And I will have more oxygen in my arteries than I will in my veins, because the arteries are carrying oxygenated blood out to the working tissues of the body. And once that oxygen reaches the working tissues, it leaves the blood and it enters those tissues, to be utilized for aerobic based energy system work. And the more capillaries that I have, the more potential avenues I have to be able to extract oxygen from the blood. I can't Oxygen can't escape from arteries, it can't escape from veins, it only escapes at the level of the capillary.
Mm.
So I will make local tissues more aerobically fit by increasing capillary density. And the other major factor on AVO2 difference is the mitochondrial concentration in the tissues. Oxygen can only be utilized effectively in the mitochondria. So if I've got more tissues with more capillary beds and more mitochondria inside of those tissues, I'll be able to pull more oxygen out of the blood, and I'll be able to run the aerobic system in more tissues. So it's like we have these specificity studies that go all the way back to like the 1970s and 80s, like largely like William McCardle and the Ketch brothers doing this stuff at Queens College, where they would take their landmark watershed study. They took subjects and they tested their VO2 max on a treadmill. Then they trained them with 6 weeks of quote unquote vigorous swimming, and then they put them back on a treadmill and retested their VO2, and they saw that there was no difference in VO2, despite the fact that they were able to see that their hearts were larger and they had more blood volume and all this kind of stuff. And their conclusions were that they were unable to utilize this increased blood volume and oxygen, carrying capacity, because the running muscles did not improve their local adaptations.
Mm.
Their running muscles had no difference in the capillary beds or the mitochondria present in them, because they weren't trained. And that you ultimately have to train the muscle in that's used for that movement in the same contractile type. Running is ultimately this ballistic contractile activity. So even if I trained the running muscles in a non-ballistic way, I wouldn't see the same level of improvement for running. It's like you have to train the task, to be able to improve the physiological adaptations in the task. So like I chose to follow a biomechanics model with this kinematics and kinetics thing, because the physiology is too much of chasing your own tail. It just reminds me of like that image of like the snake eating its own tail in some ways. There's too many pathways. It's too complicated in some ways. Like biomechanics, trust me, it's just as friggin' complicated, but it's easier to convince people to accept your overly simplified model in a biomechanics paradigm, in my opinion, because there's fewer biomechanics nerds in sports science than physiology nerds. And the physiology nerds are so smart that they'll call you out on any error that you make. So every model that you can possibly create is incredibly flawed. I know that my model is flawed, and I'm just hoping that it's flawed in a system that is less noticeable as compared to the physiology ones, where every smart person will tear you to pieces. Because I do think that if you can train the pattern, the stance, and the plane at different levels of kinetic output, you're going to be an incredibly healthy individual that's able to be very resistant to problems and capable of adapting in a lot of different environmental circumstances.
Awesome. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, cool. So let's look at Mr. Dan Trink's question, the man from Fort.
Who is an absolute savage,
Dude,
and like one of the best human beings I've ever met in my life.
I saw I had kind of seen him post some things on some stuff on your post, and then I saw his gym on Strength Coach TV, and then dove into his blog, and I was like, this guy is the man. Like, really, really
He
big fan.
is, man.
So
Kyle Fields, the other head of that, is also like just one of my favorite people in the world. Like those guys are just awesome, and they live it, man. They are so unpretentious and such cool guys that just train and like they don't have those ulterior motives that a lot of like total D-bags in our field have. And I really can't say enough good things about both of those guys and their gym. Like I love those guys.
yeah, yeah. So he asks, given your rethinking of the big movement patterns, what changes would you make to the traditional programming models, particularly exercise selection, though feel free to discuss any considerations of strength athletes, particularly powerlifters, weightlifters, and strongmen? If you were coaching someone competing in one of these sports, what would differ from the tried and true particulars?
Yeah, and it's like I said, this is a perfect question to be in the three hole because it's a little bit of the answers to question one and a little bit of the answers to question two, in my opinion, that come back here. So it's sort of like I think that lifters are really smart at figuring out every way to work around problems. It's like lifters and fighters are great at that stuff because it, they're sports that you can do year round, in particular in the Northeast. Like I've lived in the Northeast my whole life, and you can't play baseball year round here. You just can't. Like you can't play baseball in the snow. The ground is the same color as the ball. Like it doesn't roll in the snow. It's like so you can lift year round because it's indoors, and you can wrestle and fight year round because it's indoors. Like even basketball, like it's I suppose indoors, but maybe you don't have access to like indoor courts. Like you got to get a bunch of other guys involved to be able to have a pickup game. Like all I need is one other person to wrestle and fight with, and all I need is like some weights to be able to lift. And it's like the people that get good at lifting are, I've had this conversation with Dan a couple times too, and it's sort of like you got to be almost a little bit antisocial to get to a really high level as a lifter. Like you got to almost not fit in with other people so that you feel like your best friend in the world is the barbell. And the barbell like never lies to you. It always tells you exactly how much weight is on it. It weighs the same in everywhere you go. You can count on that thing no matter what. It's never deceptive. It has no gray area. It's a beautiful thing, and I think a lot of us that get into this really high level of lifting, like we have problems. Like we have some like deep seated emotional and personal problems, and there's a lot of these things where you can't trust yourself, you can't trust others, but you and to you, the more antisocial you become in some ways, the more the iron gives back to you. You spend more time with it, and it rewards you by changing your body and by allowing you to put more iron on it. And at a certain point, though, it punishes you, and that point seems to be like where you've almost become so antisocial that, like, you almost don't know how to be a normal person anymore. Like, you've gone to these extremes with modifying your lifestyle to allow you, like, it's like your food is different from everybody else's on the planet. Your friends are these extremists. You avoid a ton of things, like, so that you can go to bed early, or, like, other people don't behave this way and they don't think this way. And now you're almost ostracized from the greater community. I've said, like, I think at that point in time, it's almost like you need, like, we are social animals, and you need to get back into that social side of yourself, and you need to learn how to relax and turn things off. And it's almost like, you're almost strategically learning how to be a normal human being again that can be social, so that you can bring your lifting career even further. It's almost this, like, see you on the dark side of the moon kind of thought process of, like, realizing the, like, where you've gone, and how you've been able to depend on yourself and the bar to get you so far, but now you literally have to flip it 180 to go even farther with it. And it's just such a crazy thought process, I think, in some ways. But the more, like, it's crazy. Like, I feel like I've never been happier in New York City since I've been at Hype Gym. I've got, like, the management there is awesome. It's the first time I've worked someplace where I really like the people that are in charge. It's like they're cool people. They let us be wacky and, like, have fun. They don't make us feel bad for being weirdos. Like, the other trainers that are there are cool. Like, they train hard. We laugh a lot. Like, my life has, on a day-to-day basis, improved by hundreds and hundreds of percentage points since I've been over there. And I feel like I feel healthier than I've ever felt since I've been in New York. I'm stronger than I've ever been. And it's a big part of that is just, like, enjoying this social atmosphere. And, like, I don't do any like corrective exercises. I'm so lazy with that. It's ridiculous. But it's almost like, my corrective exercises are like having lunch with Vinny and Marcos, and, like, laughing my ass off with those guys. And, like, even my clients are happier over there than they have been anywhere else. And it's just, like, feeds in such a positive manner to helping you improve in these ways. And I it's funny, like, I see a lot of these forums that a lot of, like, strength athletes are on, or like Facebook groups or things like that. And a lot of these guys are just super nasty. You know what I mean? Like, they're incredibly insulting of other guys. Like, anybody posts a video, and, like, 20,000 dudes come out of the woodwork to, like, poke holes in it, and, like, check them on depth, or, like, question their training methods and this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, it's an enormously contrarian society. Everybody's, like, incredibly insecure, and they're a bunch of a-holes for the most part. And it's like, it's really tough if that's what you're going to create as your atmosphere for your community. And I think that that's a problem. So I think that the people that tend to go into those worlds of competitive lifting, like, there's going to be this tendency of it's highly likely that you're going to adopt that kind of mindset. Like, I'm a huge snob for exercise, for sure. Like, I'm really bougie, and I insult a lot of other people's techniques and approaches. And it's like, do you even biomechanics, bro? Like, what is that? Like, I see all kinds of stuff, and I immediately go to these very negative places in my head. I've been very conditioned to do that, and I think I'm very common for this community and for this world. So, like, to begin this answer, I would say that, like, it's very similar to that rabbit hole presentation that I did in Texas a few years back of like, listen, man, like as a society, we are going very dopaminergic, and we're very like numbers driven, and we're very fragmented and like judgmental, and at a certain point, like we're losing sense of our bodies, we're losing sense of ourselves, we're losing sense of the connection we have with others, and the medicine for this is to stop being so selfish and to stop thinking so much about you all the time, and to give away to other people. And it's the hardest thing in the world. And usually these things start at home, and appreciating the people that we have closest to us, who are the people that we tend to abuse and dismiss the soonest. I'm like speaking to myself in this answer in many ways, and trying to remind myself what's most important, and like who you should be your best person for. But it's I could give a very similar answer as to question 1 and 2, that it's all of these biomechanics based things, and in many ways that's just a compartmentalizing answer. It's literally just pulling the world apart and breaking it down into categories, as opposed to appreciating the world as a whole, and appreciating the togetherness of things, and just feeling and being. And I just think that if you are a strength athlete, there are moments and times where you need to act more like the almost a hippie crunchy kind of community, and get in touch with yourself, and to probably feel your body. And like, if I think every strength athlete in the world should probably buy the Feldenkrais Beginners Series, awareness through movement, audio recordings, and because those are the most sensory things I've ever done. And just play those audios and feel your body, feel your feet, feel the way that your thorax responds to the movement of your arms, and the way that your pelvis responds to the movement of your legs. Because the more that you go into this dopaminergic realm of progressive overload, and you're going to lose your senses. You're going to lose what your body feels like. You're going to move more and more into this abstract, bizarre world of lifting goals that are very artificial and novel for our species. And you're gonna become a real weirdo for the most part.
Yeah.
So I think that really, in some ways, is a good answer to give the audience, because this is a question that's been asked by someone that I specifically know, Dan, and someone that I've had a similar conversation with, and I just think that like it's a critical concept for people to try to wrap their minds around.
Yeah. That's such a cool answer, even contrasted with the answer on Facebook, which is like about mechanoreceptors in the acetabulum. So I'm glad you went there. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll keep rocking and rolling. So we got question from Artem Imnads. Hope I said that right. So, for someone who trains and competes in powerlifting, do you see the example program in big patterns as a good way to gain some variability post-meet? So maybe an 8 to 12 week program using that format before transitioning back to more big 3, sagittal plane dominant meet prep training. If so, is there anything you'd add to that? Maybe more SCC type drills, or would that depend on the individual and their level of movement variability?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that when I think of that rethinking the big patterns program that's in there, I think it's probably a pretty damn good thing for someone like a power lifter to do, actually. Um, and I'll tell you what, it'll smoke you. Like, it's not easy. Like, go ahead and just try to do like 3 sets of 8 with like a lower body lift paired with an upper body lift. It's gonna absolutely, like, if you're really strong, oh my God, it's like it's terrible. Like, even in mass two, like a lot of people don't realize how tragically hard the stim days are going to be. They look so easy on paper. Okay, well, it's like 3 sets of 10 of squat and bench, and like, dude, it takes a toll on you if you really, like phase one is 3 sets of 15 in mass two on stim day, and go ahead and do your like 15 rep max. It's going to be one of the worst experiences of your life. So it sounds like, I think a lot of people that are going to be power lifters, if they actually did this program, it would wreck them, because they're going to have to do like things like sets of 10 or 12 or 8 or something like that. And they're also going to have to do things like 5 minutes of versiclimber or, running. And I don't know when the last time that most powerlifters ran for 5 minutes is, but it's going to rock a lot of those people. And try to get that workout in an hour, because it's meant to be an hour-long workout because it's designed for a personal training hour session. So good luck, man. It seems like a very simple program on paper. If you do those things with intent, it'll. Okay.
Go for it.
So if you're doing those sensory motor competency challenges in the sagittal plane during phase one in the right way, it will definitely reposition your thorax if you do those things even remotely close to correct. Like, Dave, I don't know how many clients you've been working with, different rib cage presentations, but I mean, Bill Hartman
Everyone.
nailed that shit so
Yeah.
hard. It's insane. Like
Zach
a
is
whole
taking
other.
it to Zach and Lucy are like, I mean, that is I honestly think of it as a blessing in my life with
Yeah.
general population clients. Like, it is just so fast and effective to get demonstrable change in assessment wise. If you don't have a table, boom, lay on your back and hook lying. It's either narrow or wide, and for every 1C, 2C, or I'm sorry, A3, B3 exercise that we're putting in. I mean, even in groups, right? We get some questions
Mm-hmm.
about groups. Mike Baker does such a good job of this, of like, let's look at their
Yep.
ISA, and we've got a dead bug variation. All these people are reaching forward. All these people are going overhead, and it's just such a
Dude,
nice
it is
filter.
so money. It's ridiculous. I just haven't seen anything that reproducible. Not even close. Like, it's so much more effective than anything I've been exposed to.
That and Obers, and you've got stage one,
Yeah.
movement
I mean,
protocols.
it's just like, it's crazy. I have not had a single case of looking at infrasternal angle, putting them into what's appropriate for their group, and not changing their rib cage to like 90 on the money. Like, it's absolutely insane. So like, and it's literally like what gets me all riled up to make these Facebook posts that are like, hey, whatever it is you think you're doing from a movement perspective, check yourself before you wreck yourself, because I bet your shit sucks. Okay? Like, just to put it out there. Like, if you don't know
Yeah.
about this stuff, like if you haven't looked at like what has burgeoned from Bill Hartman's brain and what his children are doing with this, you are missing the the biggest boat that has ever rolled through our movement landscape. And like, okay, keep doing your ankle rocks, keep doing your T-spine rotation and extension drills,
Yeah.
keep doing your, I don't even know, fill in the blank, your shoulder mobs, your, keep latching that band around your leg and doing your hip flexor stretches or your hip openers or whatever the hell it is you're doing. But have you ever even bothered to do like a test, intervention, retest approach? Like, have you even considered that? If you haven't, you can't even be friends. We can't be friends. I'm sorry. Like, there's no seat at the table for you. Seats taken. Back of the bus, Forrest. It's like, uh, listen, like, if like you got to get on this stuff because it is going to solve all of these problems that you've been unsuccessful at solving. Like, I had this guy, and I'm not trying to pick on FRC because it's one of those realms of movement stuff where there's a lot of smart people in it, and I think that they're appreciating some stuff and like they're talking real things like histology and tissue change and Wolff's law and all that kind of jazz. But I got this guy in New York that comes sees me, and he's an FRC guy, and he's doing like this reciprocal 90-90 seated kind of thing that a lot of FRC people do. And it's just such a classical patterned, like right lateralized pattern presentation, where he's just experiencing limitations on left femoral internal rotation and right femoral external rotation. And I just basically like looked at his rib cage. He was a narrow guy. I did like a simple like horizontal reach, fog the glass kind of exhale, nice calm relaxed thing. And then I was like, okay, and it's funny because I'm like, well, how long have you been working on trying to get this side symmetrical with the other side? And he's like, probably like 3 or 4 months. And I'm like, well, is it any better? He's like, no. I'm like, what's your solution? He's like, well, I keep working harder at it. I'm like, okay, great. Try this drill. We do it for maybe a minute, and then he goes back, he does it, and he's like, wow, it's completely better. It's completely different. It feels exactly the same on this side as the other side. And I go, what's your takeaway from this experience? And he just couldn't put it together. He could not like make this jump to like, this approach works better for solving the problem that I have, because I was like, what are you going to do in the future for this particular thing? And he's like, I guess I'll just keep doing the thing I was doing before. And I was like, no, what is wrong with you? Why can't you just see that like we just did the solution? We literally did the thing that you need to do to get better at the thing you're trying to get better at. Like, it's amazing to me the degree to which people put up these like barriers of acceptance. And I'm willing to be enough of an a-hole to call people out in a very aggressive manner. And if I have to be somebody that people hate, I don't even care, because most of the people that are smarter than me at anatomy, such as Z Cups and Hartman, they're the kind of people that will always take the high road. And it's like at a certain point, I feel like somebody has to, just come out and like slap people in the throat and be a dick. And if I have to be that person, I'm okay with that. And it's like, because I really do think that I want to see the world move better and exercise better. And it's like the stuff that you're doing is not as good as the stuff that these guys are rolling out there. And for the love of God, like open your eyes to it. So it's pretty wild. But yeah, I like my sensory motor competency checklists. I think that they're understandable for a lot of people. Really, the next thing that I want to do is basically roll out like what I'm going to call a troubleshoot checklist. Like hey, what are you missing? And almost like a computer like user manual sort of deal. Like, oh, this is your problem. Well, you just need to like hit like Control F1, and that should fix this thing. Oh, you have this problem. Well, like somebody needs to apply a sensory stimuli to your heel, and okay, bang, it fixes it right away. So it's
and just there's a kind of a corollary to that. So Lucy Hendricks just launched her new blog, holisticfitnessconnector.com. It's amazing, and she's actually approaches this from the point of so it sounds like your SEC checklists are more for the athlete, the client, the person doing the movement, and then she's actually coming up with kind of a similar thing, a troubleshoot checklist, but more from the coaching and cueing perspective, like for trainers, like, okay, how do you get these competencies? Like, what are the actual like cues you're using to get people to understand what those, so there might be some cool overlap there as well.
I think, does that fully answer Artem's question? I know that it was mostly like the RTBP program.
Yeah, anything you would, it's mostly like, do you think that'd be a good idea? And so,
yes,
basically like, yes, for sure. Definitely. Okay, cool. We'll get a few more. So we got a lot of questions from my man, Tyler Wall.
Man. I got to meet him in Vancouver. What a cool guy. Like the Vancouver group was really great. Like, Canadians are just such nice people overall. They're just Canadians there's no way that you can hate those guys. They're just like they're genuine people. hardy folk. Uh, love hockey, you know.
So his first question is, and this is something we were talking about earlier, what's your habit formation slash behavior change
Oh
process?
yeah, and I love it, Dave, because you're experiencing it firsthand. Where I threaten the hell out of people. You don't want to change. Well, you're gonna change. Like, uh, it's funny. Like, I train with my boy Vinny Brandstatter, and he's like, man, like it's unbelievable. Like, you really do force me to like go to bed earlier on the weekends and like eat consistently and all that kind of stuff because I know I'm gonna show up on Monday and there's a 0% chance that we're not going to do this hellacious workout that you wrote down on purpose, like on paper. It's like there's a 0% chance that we're not going to do the assistance work at the end. Like you're a crotchety old bastard, and like you really are just the most stubborn person I know. And like it's horrible. Like I have to do this stuff or I'll like literally die. And I look like if you go back through like any kind of evolution based science and you see like I just think that like it's very well worth studying adaptation, like just what causes animals to mutate and adapt. And it's very clear, like the answer is very simple. Animals experience a much greater rate of adaptive change when the environment becomes inhospitable. If the environment is nice and easy and things are going well, no change takes place in those species. When the environment all of a sudden threatens that species, rate of change goes crazy. It reminds me almost of like the Hunger Games. Everybody's like chilling out and like nobody's fighting with each other. But then all of a sudden, like the people behind the scenes are like, "Oh no, we're gonna make this volcano explode and release these tracker jackers." And that's going to force everybody to the cornucopia, and now all hell's going to break loose. It's like nothing changes until there's pressure. Like you gotta put pressure on people to force them to change. Like Seth Ragini, I think I said his last name right. That's actually interesting, but
Yeah, it's probably like
it might be. It
Raviani.
might be. He asked a great question at Hype on this past Wednesday about kind of something along the lines of like the book Homeostasis, Allostasis, and the cost of physiological adaptation. The answer to his question is that behavior is an allostatic measure that organisms use to make sure that homeostasis does not change. And so I'll give like the punchline before the joke there. But ultimately, homeostasis is only relative to a very few uh, physiological systems in the body. It's relative to internal for mammals, internal temperature, partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli and the arteries. It's relative to pH. It's relative to blood glucose. It's probably relative to a couple others, but those are some of the big ones. Like my internal temperature cannot deviate very much, or I'll die. My internal blood pH can't deviate too much, or I'll die. My partial pressure of oxygen can't deviate too much, or I'll die. And blood glucose can't deviate too much, or I'll die. So at all times, there's things that are potentially threatening to those systems, and once those homeostatic systems are threatened, I have to kick in allostatic mechanisms to regulate those things. If I'm talking blood glucose, it's pretty simple. Like insulin and glucagon are allostatic measures that my body kicks in to be able to maintain blood glucose levels in an appropriate level. Um, and breathing, just changing breathing, is an easy way to manage partial pressure of oxygen. But beyond that, like behaviors are what my body would use to try to regulate these things as well. Like, if like my body temperature will the closest variable to threatening body temperature is hydration level. Okay, so I will enact behavioral strategies to acquire fluids to regulate the homeostatic variable of internal body temperature. I might cease exercise if my pH levels are moving to a realm that's threatening to a significant degree. Like I'll change my behavior to make sure that homeostasis is maintained. Um, so it's the same thing that I'm thinking of with this. Like I'm going to do some things that are going to threaten your homeostasis. Like sleep is an allostatic approach. Sleep is an allostatic system, plain and simple. It is there to regulate um, some kind of a homeostatic piece. It seems to be potentially ATP levels in the brain because ATP ADP ratios are a homeostatic variable. So it's whatever thing is happening right now from an acute setting in with your physiology or your behavior is like I would say like physiology dictates behavior and behavior modifies physiology. And they're this back and forth arrow that's all like everything when you get down to it is there to try to maintain homeostasis. Behavior is simply a device that nature has come up with to try to preserve homeostasis. It's an allostatic system. And that's kind of cool to really think about in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I wanted you to talk a little more about, which is somewhat related, is the so you had a good, really great post. I'm hoping that one day we can stop coming up with myopic scientific explanations to give people excuses to stop physically working
Yep,
really hard. Can you
absolutely. So
elaborate on
it's
that?
like, it even with fitness, okay, it's kind of like everybody's looking for like this golden nugget that would be like the thing. Like, oh, if I just know what's happening with this variable, well, I'll be able to drive fitness to these unprecedented levels, whether that be like muscle oxygen saturation or anything else. Like to me, it's just simply going to be like, what is the amount of specific work that you're able to accumulate on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual, multi-annual basis, that will tell me your fitness level. Okay, uh, and it always has to be more, in my opinion. Like fitness is it's exercise is a scientific domain, and science to me is kind of in the same family as technology and progress. And progress, like I'm terrible with technology. I'll be the first to admit that. I can't even use an Excel spreadsheet. Like I'm terrible with that. But I'm very much tapped into the notion of progress and constantly trying to move things towards more and more progress. And and it's sort of like I don't want to start so low that there's no threat, because I can start like super basement, minimal level, and like, of course, you'll be able to make progress on that. I still need to, I need it to be overload. An overload to me is anytime that we move into the realm of threatening homeostasis, and I have to kick in allostatic measures to be able to manage that. Otherwise, you wouldn't even notice it. You wouldn't kick in allostatic measures. The question becomes like how many allostatic measures are you enacting at any point in time, and what is the degree to which those allostatic measures are being amplified? Like you can because there's a cost to running those things at any point in time. Um, I it's so tricky because it is this multifactorial, very complicated thing, but this is why I'm leaning towards the realm of creating a biomechanics driven model as opposed to a physiological driven model, because there's so many loops and counter loops and checks and balances with physiology versus, at least if I'm just talking shapes and quantity of things, I can wrap my mind around that a little bit easier. But it's I'll probably be able to find an allostatic marker that I can scientifically deem to be critically threatening to an individual. and tell that person you need to back off because you're unable to regulate this particular allostatic marker. Maybe that's cortisol, and then like 5 years later, we're like, oh, well, maybe that actually wasn't so bad, and maybe all of these cortisol tests are kind of shitty anyways. Oops, maybe I shortchanged you and I robbed you of like 3 years of possibly like driving your system to the highest possible level. My bad. So it's kind of like even like creatinine, for instance. You know what I mean? Like doctors will see my creatinine scores and probably be like, dude, you need to go on dialysis. Like you're gonna die. And it's like, no, I just have a lot of muscle mass. Like your readings are not appropriate for the population that I belong to. Why don't you just ask me how I'm feeling? You know, how about we look at you and you look at me and you start taking notes on how I do things? Because I'm pretty sure I'm killing it, and I'm pretty sure you look like the crypt keeper from HBO. Like it's like let's take a bigger look at the big picture. Like even like it's funny. Like Derek Hansen was in New York and he was watching me and Vinny Brandstatter do our recovery workout. Our recovery workout sucks. Like it will break people. And like I'm in a puddle. I'm dead on the floor by the end of it. And it's kind of this notion like that's not recovery. And my argument is all of the measurements that I care about are going in the right direction. When I started introducing this session into the program 2 to 3 times a week, all of the numbers that I care about started to move really favorably. So it might not look like recovery because it sucks, but I got to tell you, the things that I care about are improving dramatically. So I'm going to call it recovery because it seems to be improving my ability to do the things that I want to do in training. But I think if anybody looked at it, they'd be like, I don't know about that shit. That's not recovery work. And I'm sure.
Yeah. And you guys are doing what are y'all doing for that? It's like the
Yeah,
double kettlebell deadlift.
yep, it's a mile on the
Running.
salt. It's 20 kettlebell deadlifts, 20 push-ups, 20 goblet squats, and then a quarter mile on the true form treadmill. And we've kind of bumped it up to like 4 or 5 rounds. Like I did 5 rounds. It was super tough, but you know,
And are you just kind of going at a certain pace or watching heart
I'm trying to
rate
do it as
or?
fast as I can. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
You just put the only variable I'm tracking. Vinny looks at his heart rate while he's doing it. I put the clock on. Did I do it faster than last time? Um, and it's tough doing it with him because he's such an aerobic machine. Like that kid's work capacity is insane. I probably made an error not drafting him as my first round pick for the juggle. Mainly because Ryan LeCure is dieting down for a bodybuilding show, and I did not have this advanced scouting information prior to making that pick. I feel like it's not like it's going to be close though. Still, like the red team is still going to absolutely murk every other team, like just stiff arming you guys' face into the ground. But it's still tough for me because Vinny will lap me on that damn workout. Like he's finished that thing in 25 minutes, which is just preposterous. And the best I've ever done is 35 minutes. So it's tough trying to keep up with somebody like him on that. But it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of like it's funny like doing some of these workouts like you were saying, like if you're doing that Cajun workout, that 2040 phase 2 Cajun 3 times a week, it forces your hand. Like, I find myself like, man, I better do some aerobic work on the weekend because if I don't, I'm going to get absolutely murdered on Monday. Like I'm going to feel terrible. So it's amazing. Like I've forced myself to get so much better at taking care of those little details, like doing my aerobic fitness, sleeping better on a consistent basis, like eating 3 meals a day. I wouldn't do it if I didn't have to. And
Hmm.
and again, I just look at it like nobody's going to do everything if it's like sunny skies and smooth sailing all the time. Like I gotta introduce some environmental upheaval. I've got to become like
Yeah.
the clockmaker of the Hunger Games board, and just like send some like mutant animals at you to to force the issue.
Yeah, it's working. Last question of the day comes from the most beautiful woman on earth, Kelsey Flanagan. And she wants to know, we were just talking about this morning. I was like, do you have any questions for Pat? She was like, ask him to tell us about his
Hmm.
nutrition. So, of course, nutrition coach Kelsey wants to hear about kind of your overall nutrition strategy. If you have one, how many calories you're eating per day to perform so well, and just your overall, just give us the Pat Davidson
You
nutrition
know,
story.
I'm glad that Ben doesn't listen to this stuff. I'm sure there's a 0% chance that
He
he's
won't.
listening to this.
He won't.
Because God, I'll never forget when Ben came up to New York to kind of like part of the trip involved him doing like meeting with me and Steph regarding like our nutrition stuff and like doing some blood work and labs. And like I met him at this barbecue place and, and I'm literally just like eating like a bucket of brisket, like slathered in barbecue sauce. And I at the time I was like, I'm doing pretty good here. I'm not eating too many carbs. I'm just crushing meat. Like this, he'll be proud of this. And like, I just didn't know what he would be into. But you know, God, like I've gotten better about nutrition. But my primary thought process is still more food on the plate, more weight on the bar. And like here's kind of how my week breaks down. Like let me start on Monday. Okay, so by like Monday morning, I'm generally disgusted with myself, uh, and it's kind of like my breakfast starts off really well, and like my breakfast is a shake that I've come up with, and it's spinach, coconut oil, avocado, two sweet potatoes. There's strawberries, blueberries, cherries, and a plantain that goes into this bad boy with almond milk and have you seen this new Snickers commercial that's making fun of the right way to say almond? And the guy jumps out of his car and he's like almond with an L. And I'm like, screw that guy and screw Snickers. It's almond. Okay, that's the right way to say it. You got to eat almonds and drink almond milk. It's good for you, kid. Anyways, there's also like about 40 grams of protein in it too. So that thing's legit. It's like I don't know how many calories. I've never counted a calorie in my life, but I know that all the good stuff is in that thing. It's got phytos. It's got it's got some sweet potatoes, which I just in my head refer to uh, good stuff. And I
Wait.
eat my
Say that again. What do you refer to sweet potatoes as?
sweeties. It's sweeties. I throw my sweeties in there, and it's like breakfast of champions. It's like I think it's got anti-inflammatory components to it. It's solid. And then for lunch, I'll have Chipotle. Me and Vinny roll into the Chipotle across the street from us, and I get extra white rice. They literally they don't even need to ask me what I want anymore. Like it's like ready by the time I get to the counter. The little bowl bucket is full of white rice, chicken, hot sauce, and cheese goes on that thing. Um, and then for dinner, my wife and I use this service, Fresh Direct, where we get our groceries from, and they have pre-made meals. And I eat two of them. One is a halibut meal, and the other one is a jerk chicken meal. The halibut comes with peas and rice, and the jerk chicken comes with some beans and sweeties. So Like it's pretty good, man. Like I said, I'm real good. Like Monday through Wednesday because I eat exactly the same thing for those 3 meals a day, and sometimes I'll have like a Cliff Bar middle of the day or like right before training. Then then
I
Thursday
like it.
starts with the same breakfast and the same lunch, but usually my wife will go out with her friends for dinner, and I start feeling bad for myself because I know that she's going to have delicious restaurant food, and I'm at home and I don't want to eat my halibut and jerk chicken. So I go on Seamless, aka the devil, and I order in something that will be very tasty and, in Ben House's words, hedonic. I'm falling into the hedonic American culture of the general population. And one of my favorites is a restaurant in Hoboken, New Jersey called the Stewed Cow. And I will get the chicken club sandwich and the loaded tater tots, the cheesy loaded tater tots. And I don't know how many calories are in that. I would assume somewhere around 1,200 calories. Probably, actually, way more than that. I don't even know what I'm talking about. It's got to be 1,800 to 2,000 calories in that meal. And then it's like the downward spiral has begun, starting with the introduction of that bad habit on Thursday night. And like, Friday, again, like breakfast and lunch is generally good because it's just very standardized. And I have managed to make breakfast for the most part standardized even on weekend days. Sometimes I will order in breakfast, and it will be something called the Newark pancake wrap, which is an omelet that has a pancake wrapper around the omelet, and it's not good until you load that thing up with like at least 4 knifefuls of butter, and then Aunt Jemima syrup. I think that Aunt Jemima syrup increases force production and hypertrophy more than any other variable that you can introduce. Um, if it didn't, then she wouldn't have the apron on. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I don't think Ben will ever be able to like stay with me again for any extended period of time because he just can't handle it. He can't handle it on any level. Like the degree to which I do not cook and order in is like beyond anything that he's capable of dealing with on either a cognitive level or an emotional level. It's like such a drastic removal from normalcy for him. uh, it's
Yeah.
incredible. But I really feel like I need to eat a tremendous amount of calories. Like if I
Yeah.
didn't, I wouldn't be able to support the power gut that I've got going on, and some of my dance moves on a daily basis where I rub my stomach and pull my shirt up and pull lint out of my belly button and pretend to eat it. They wouldn't be as much of a factor for those who are around me, and that would really be a terrible loss for them. There's very few
Yeah.
things more attractive than a man who of Irish descent who is 5'6" and 230 pounds, um, moving in a compensatory frontal plane with manual manipulation of the abdomen. Uh, you're going to be treated to some of that in Costa Rica in June. Uh, yeah, as
I'm
you should be.
excited.
And I will probably lose somewhere around 3 to 5% body fat during those like 8 to 9 days in the jungle, because when my nutrition is actually dialed in, it is amazing what happens body composition wise. But I don't really care that much about body composition, and I would much rather like look like a little Super Mario cousin from Ireland and like crush huge weights, than like necessarily like be lean on a day in and day out basis. And like I don't know, like in some ways it's like it's just less cognitive stress for me to go behaviorally the way that I do, and it's supporting my goals of numerical progress and in training and that sort of thing. So I don't freak out about it too much. It's not too broken. I know that there's problems with it. Probably have
Yeah.
cancer, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean the body, the insane amount of work you're doing definitely is a nice counterpoint, and it's almost like you need these, caloric bombs
It's
to
an
even support it.
allostatic approach to solving a homeostatic
Yeah,
threat. Whatever, whatever. It's
I
such
love
a
it.
bullshit excuse for eat fucking ice cream.
Awesome, man. Well, beautiful. Great job as always. Solid episode 1. Knocked out of the park. So thank you so much as always. Check us out on drpatdavidson.com. And we'll see you next time.
Boom.